At the start of its life, and at its very end, it was a very debated piece of legislation, only being passed by a very small margin, with the main changes coming from social welfare moving from state to federal. It had three main functions, being education, ration supplying, and to establish freemen hospitals. However, these were not used by the majority of Southern freemen. And at the end of its first year, the Military Reconstruction Act of March 1867 was passed, stripping the Bureau of any authority and power to create any more new programs. When regular channels of immediate aid were re-established in the South, the Bureau began to focus more on education. Before the Bureau, schools for freemen have already been established by other organizations. The Bureau was planning to cooperate with these organizations until local governments could support the schools. The Bureau wasn't able nor wanted to beat these private schools. It focused on supporting them with its federal powers. At the start, they recorded up to 90,000 students attending 100 schools across the South, and the Bureau was planning to close the original divisions to help support it more. The Bureau wanted to create a system like it was in the North, since most Southerners were unsure what would replace slavery. They believed that if they could figure out the labor problem in the South, everything else would fall back into place. Agents quickly found this difficult since African Americans could now decide who and where they wanted to work. To combat this, the Bureau enacted policies that considered most people without jobs to be vagrants. Everyone was responsible to provide if they physically could. If they didn't, they were fined and then often put in jail or were hired out to other employers. The Federal Bureau also attempted to find freemen for government positions in multiple states. Agents were ordered to find intellectual and influential freemen in the sub-districts. The hardest task was to find someone that both races would have confidence in. Those chosen tended to be literate, in their primes, and have already been freed before the Civil War. Only some recommendations resulted in freemen being put in office, though those numbers might be misleading since records are slim. The Bureau's Assistant Commissioner ordered agents to also make a list of white men that could be candidates for office. They used the same requirements that they used to find freemen, but at least 50% of this list were individuals in their 40s. They did this because those over 40 were less likely to have served in the Confederate Army. Men also on this list weren't really wealthy, mainly middle class. Most of the people nominated were also from the Upper South, where the Union occupied almost immediately after the war broke out. The most promising thing the Bureau had at its start was all the land that it acquired. Being part of the War Department, they had access to all confiscated and captured property in the South. All this combined gave them up to 9,000 acres of land, which they were planning to divide into 40-acre plots and give to freemen. Thousands of freemen settled on their own plots, but this was going to change after President Johnson took office. Johnson was a big supporter of amnesty for most of the South, and in this context, he wanted all confiscated property to be restored to their previous owners, kicking off most freemen off the property. Northern Texas remained virtually untouched by the war. Most white Southerners there harbored deep hatred toward anything that represented the Union, and were willing to intimidate and even murder to maintain the established social racial order. Harrison County became the strategic location for the Union at that time. This place was chosen because it had a high freeman population, but enforcement was difficult. They had no cavalry, and in the outskirts of Texas, where most outlaws rode horseback, they had no way to deal with the problem. At the end, they were able to get cavalry, but at that point, it was little to help fix the situation. After the War Department split the South into military districts, the Bureau had an even harder time dealing with the problems. Many argue that the little things the Bureau did do help uphold the status quo for freemen only being laborers. Many argue that since all the Freedmen Bureau really did with the labor contracts, it's put the freemen back as laborers. Many argue that this helped normalize the rise of a new segregation systems and the black codes. Legislative concerns during Reconstruction were focused on establishing a single class of American citizen, or specifically a protected class. At the beginning, there was concern that this class would lead to racial classification in some laws. After hearing testimonies from refugees fleeing the South, when it came time to reenact the Bureau, they changed who they would help to all freemen and all loyal Union whites. This attitude changed since the job before was just to help the entire South. After the war, the federal government started to take this new responsibility to make freemen citizens as the focus. As the first federal anti-poverty program and the first attempt to impose federal authority over individual citizens through bureaucratic means, it had a lot of opponents. The leading opponent was President Andrew Jackson. When he took office, his main Reconstruction policy focused on large-scale amnesty for former Confederates without the guarantee of black suffrage. After he took office, he dismantled the Freedmen's Bureau.